Nurses. What was your scariest moment on the job? I was reading to my patient Rose when she got the call that they'd found her a heart. She started crying because her son Raymond had power of attorney, and he'd already told the doctors he'd refuse any transplant on religious grounds. Rose begged me to help her get to surgery before Raymond arrived. We had maybe 30 minutes before he showed up, and Rose was sobbing that this was her only chance to live, and she was of sound mind. But the court had given Raymond control after her stroke last year, even though her brain was fine. The transplant coordinator came in saying we needed to get her prepped immediately because the heart was only viable for another 2 hours, and there was another patient waiting if Rose couldn't receive it. Even though I knew I could lose my job, I wasn't going to let my favorite patient die when she wanted to live. I helped the nurses get her into a surgical gown while she kept checking her phone because Raymond had been texting, asking why the hospital called him. She typed back that it was just routine tests, buying us time. The anesthesiologist came in to start her IV, and Rose begged him to hurry, but he said they needed Raymond's signature on the consent forms. Rose started crying harder, saying she wanted the surgery. She was fully competent, but the anesthesiologist said his hands were tied without power of attorney approval. I ran to the nurses' station and found Rose's doctor, explaining the situation, and she said legally they couldn't operate without Raymond's consent, but she'd try to stall him if he arrived. 20 minutes until Raymond got here, and the surgical team was ready, but couldn't proceed. Rose was getting her IV placed and kept saying, "Please, I want to live." The charge nurse had an idea and moved Rose to a different room, hoping Raymond would go to her old room first and buy us time. We'd just gotten her settled when we heard Raymond's voice in the hallway, demanding to know where his mother was. The charge nurse intercepted him and said Rose was getting some tests done, and led him to the empty old room. We could hear him getting angry about the empty bed. The transplant surgeon arrived saying we had 90 minutes before the heart wouldn't be viable, and asked where we were with consent. Rose begged her to just do it anyway, but the surgeon said she'd lose her license. We heard Raymond yelling at the nurse's station that he knew something was happening, and if they were hiding his mother, he'd sue everyone. The charge nurse kept trying to calm him down, but he was demanding to see Rose immediately. I stepped into the hallway to try to distract him, saying I'd just seen Rose and she was getting an x-ray, totally routine. Raymond recognized me from previous visits and grabbed my arm, demanding I take him to her right now. I said the x-ray department was backed up and it would be at least an hour, but he didn't believe me. He started checking every room while I followed, trying to slow him down with questions about his day, but he was getting more aggressive with each empty room. He grabbed a nurse and demanded Rose's room number, but she said she didn't know. He accused us all of conspiring against him and pulled out his phone to call his lawyer. Meanwhile, the heart was sitting in a cooler, losing viability by the minute. The transplant coordinator told me we had 60 minutes before they'd have to give the heart to the other patient. I went back to Rose's new room where she was fully prepped for surgery, but couldn't go anywhere. Raymond's voice was getting closer as he worked his way down the hall, now threatening to call the police if someone didn't produce his mother immediately. The surgeon came back and said the other patient was being prepped now because we were running out of time. Rose begged me to forge Raymond's signature, but the surgeon said they'd verify it with him anyway. Suddenly, Raymond appeared in the doorway and saw Rose in the surgical gown with all the IV lines, and his face went dark red. "What the hell is going on here?" he shouted. Rose tried to explain about the heart, but Raymond cut her off, saying, "We've discussed this. No transplant. God's will is God's will." He started pulling at her IV lines, and the nurses had to physically stop him. Rose was sobbing that she wanted to live, but Raymond said accepting an organ was against their beliefs. I told him Rose wanted this, but he turned on me and said I had no right to interfere in family matters. The transplant coordinator said we had 45 minutes before the heart went to someone else, and Raymond said, "Good, give it to them." Rose screamed that she was of sound mind and wanted the surgery, but Raymond pulled out his power of attorney papers, waving them at everyone. The surgeon said without his consent they couldn't proceed and started to leave. Rose grabbed her arm, begging her not to go, and Raymond tried to pull his mother's hand away, getting physically aggressive. Security arrived, but Raymond showed them his legal papers, and they said he had the right to make medical decisions. 30 minutes left, and the heart was dying in its cooler while Rose was dying in her bed, and Raymond stood there with his arms crossed, saying this was meant to be. Full story on the channel below.